Welcome and good afternoon, one and all, to the fourth in a series of webinars. I am Lisa Perch, and I'm with Society Consulting, and I'll be moderating this afternoon's session of the USAID Eastern and Southern Caribbean Regional Climate Summit. I'd like to welcome everyone, including our audience, watching on UE's TV Facebook page. The U.S. government has demonstrated its renewed commitment to fighting climate change by rejoining the Paris Agreement in January of this year. In the Caribbean here, we know the need for climate action is particularly urgent and necessary. We recognize the importance of strong partnerships in this effort, and we have organized this symposium to join forces to not only share information and good and best practice, but also identify challenges that we can work together to solve via identifying new and hopefully innovative solutions. This is the fourth in a series of 8 webinars that the USAID Eastern and Southern Caribbean Mission is hosting throughout June and ending in June 30th. Over the course of the symposium, you'll hear from a variety of people working to address the climate crisis, including climate scientists, youth activists, policymakers, and hopefully we'll also hear from you, the audience, joining us this afternoon. This session is entitled Listening to the Field, Sectoral Impacts of Climate Change. We'll be hearing opening statements from our panelists, whom I'll introduce in a moment. Then I'll transition to asking them some questions, and then we'll open the floor to you, the audience, to also ask them some questions and to hear back from them and to interact with them. Thank you again for joining us. Before we start, I'd like to do a quick run through of the Blue Jeans platform, just to make sure that this is accessible and comfortable for everyone, so we have the fullest possible participation. In this platform, you can ask questions either in the Q&A box or the event chat. We will be collecting your questions to ask the speakers after they've finished their presentation. The chat is on the right side of the screen, and we encourage you to interact also with other attendees in the event chat. This is an icon with 3 people on it. If you're experiencing any issues with the Blue Jeans platform, please let us know in the moderator chat, which I believe for me looks like it has a star on it, and I hope it's the same for you. If you want to make the speaker video or presentation larger, you can adjust this at the bottom of your screen on the left-hand side. All participants are automatically muted and your cameras are switched off. I also want to advise and let you know that the event is being recorded and participants will not have their cameras on and therefore may not be visible in the recording when it's shared, but your presence certainly will be noted, and certainly your comments and your contributions will certainly be part of that recording. Before we begin the full symposium, we want to take the opportunity to start a poll, quick poll. We'd like to hear from you, our audience. Which sectors do you think are most in need of adaptation in terms of adaptation support? The choices that we would like you to consider are as follows: water, agriculture, energy, tourism, fisheries, forestry, construction, and other. I'm hoping the poll will come up soon for you. You'll probably have about 2 minutes in order to complete the poll, and then we'll do a quick run through of the results from your responses. Thank you very much. I'll take this opportunity then to introduce the panelists, and then I'll make a brief stop to just share the poll results, and then I'll invite them to make their opening remarks. So we are very honored to have with us this afternoon to support this discussion on listening to the field sectoral impacts of climate change, the following esteemed guests. First, Mr. Milton Horton, Executive Director of the Caribbean Regional Fisheries Mechanism. Mr. Ignatius John, Executive Director of the Caribbean Water and Sewerage Association. Sherry-Ann Farquharson, Knowledge Management and Capacity Development Expert with the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency. Christian Fleming, Climate Research Assistant, Caribbean Agricultural Research and Development Institute. And last but not least, Ms. Janelle Tomlinson, PhD candidate at the University of the West Indies and member of the Caribbean Youth Environment Network based in Jamaica. Thank you, all of you, for agreeing to participate and for joining us this afternoon. We're very much looking forward to hearing from you in terms of what you think may be some of the key sectoral impacts and issues and challenges that we will need to consider as this region goes forward, particularly coming out, hopefully, of the COVID pandemic and entering into possibly a new age of resilience thinking and practice. At this point, then, I'll take the opportunity to therefore invite some brief remarks from Mr. Milton Horton. Milton, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Madam Moderator. So my name is Milton Horton, and I am from the Caribbean Regional Fisheries Mechanism. And so my remarks will be focused mainly on fisheries and marine resources. But, you know, climate change is happening, and it is impacting us in the Caribbean region in a significant manner already. And it can become even more severe if we do not take appropriate action. We are facing threats from storms, floods, droughts, rising sea level, higher temperature, ocean acidification, among other threats that are threatening our coastal and marine ecosystems, as well as our lifestyle and livelihood, as well as our food security. The fact is, in the Caribbean region, our lives and our culture are centered around the sea. We depend a lot on the coastal and marine resources for our livelihoods. Our institutions, our homes, government offices, hospitals, hotels, shopping centers are all located mainly in the coastal zone. We are mainly small island developing states with relatively small land masses, and everything is close to the coast. We are dependent on tourism, we are dependent on fishing, and these are dependent on the coastal and marine resources and ecosystems. The fisheries sector is very, very important for our people, for employment, for food security. About 15% of our protein intake is from the marine resources. Fisheries is highly traded in the region, and we earn significant foreign exchange from our marine resources. So warming of the atmosphere, as well as ocean acidification, sea level rise, changes in current patterns and circulation patterns, changes in salinity, these are all having a negative impact on our fisheries. And the fish distribution is changing, fish migration is changing, the habitats are being degraded, coral reefs are dying, and you know, these are all affecting the quantity and availability of fish for our people. Hurricanes and storms are compromising safety of fishers at sea. The fishing equipment, fishing boats, fishing gears, fishing infrastructure along the coastal strip, these are all more vulnerable and have been sustaining significant impacts from hurricanes and storms, etc. Likewise, the marine ecosystems themselves have been negatively impacted. So generally, our marine living resources have preferred environmental conditions, such as temperature, salinity, dissolved oxygen, acidity, etc., that optimize their physiological processes. If the water temperature, for example, rise above their tolerable threshold, the species can die. And we have seen massive coral bleaching or death of coral due to increasing temperature. We have increasing problem with ghost gear as a result of storms scattering the fishing gears, and they are lost, but they continue fishing and have an impact on the fish and marine life. The storms have disproportionate impact on fishing communities because they are located right in the land-water interface. So our fishing communities are quite vulnerable, and in many cases too, the fishing communities are more reliant on fish and seafood for their food security, but their housing and basic services are quite vulnerable to the storms. And the fishing communities are among the most isolated and vulnerable in some of our countries, and also among the poorest. Caribbean aquaculture has been impacted. You know, the COVID pandemic has had a negative impact already on our fisheries. So those all add to the already difficult challenges faced by overfishing, pollution, etc. in the marine environment. So I think I will stop there. That's just a little overview, background context on the fisheries sector and the importance of the marine and coastal resources for our livelihoods and security. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Milton. As always, it's always good to see you and be in the same room with you. Thank you very much for sharing that overview with us and highlighting some of the interesting challenges that the fisheries sector is sharing and experiencing, but also the relevance of the sector to the region and its people, and also some of the opportunities in front of us. I'd like to next ask Mr. Ignatius John to make some remarks as well. Ignatius, the floor is yours.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and to all our listeners. Welcome to this very important and timely forum as we look at the options and possibilities with the work that we are doing to both mitigate and to help us adapt to a change in climate. I'm from the Caribbean Water and Sewage Association, an association of water utilities in the Caribbean region, as well as we do partner with many other regional partners in looking after matters to do with building resilience to climate change in the water sector in the region, such as the Caribbean Water and Wastewater Association and the development banks in the region, the CDB and the IDB, have been partnering with us on those issues. So I take the opportunity to mention them because of that type of work. And it is good that the USAID has shown some interest in the work that we are doing or attempting to do in the region. As was said before me, the water sector in the Caribbean is already being affected by climate change. Changes in the hydrological cycle, saline intrusion of groundwater sources from sea level rise, and an increase in the intensity of extreme weather events, and we have seen many of those in recent time, all having impacts on freshwater supply and on infrastructure. We have seen major setbacks in our developmental process because of those setbacks caused by extreme weather events. These problems will also compound our existing challenges in the water sector governance and water resources management and service delivery in most of our Caribbean countries. Every Caribbean island has persistent challenges in the provision of water services, and these are being exacerbated by the impacts of climate change and more recently with the impact of COVID-19. So that we are now trying to cope with these by helping to work with our utilities and finding the sort of strategies. And we have developed in the region what we call the Regional Strategic Action Plan for Building Resilience Against Climate Change, or building resilience utilities to climate change. So it will involve the looking towards the reduction in the demand on municipal supplies. That's the impact that climate change is having. It causes, and we would need an increase in energy efficiency in the water supply and its use. And of course, the need for capacity building and public sensitization. These are all areas that we need to look at, and I guess through this discussion we will be able to examine some of the and share some of the knowledge across the region and internationally, how we can partner to do that in terms of learning, replication, and sharing of best practice, and training and capacity building of our water utility operators, and most important, that of the public at large, the consumers and the citizens of the Caribbean, in understanding the climate threat and what we and each person needs to do in that effort to mitigate climate change. I will take a break here for now and leave space for some other speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Jean. Thank you very much for making some of that, making that link clearer in terms of water and sanitation, also the codependencies of the water and sanitation sector to energy, but also the importance of water to a lot of the other sectors that tend to drive our economies. I'll take this opportunity then in that context to invite Ms. Sharianne Farquharson from SECRE to make her remarks in the context of the energy sector and renewable energy and energy efficiency. Sharianne, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. And a number of the previous colleagues have definitely looked at the impacts on climate change. And the link between energy and climate has been very well established. And climate impacts the energy sector, particularly on the demand side. But the energy sector is the largest contributor to the human impacts to climate change. And so it is imperative that the energy sector responds in a manner that is equivalent to the impact that it has had on our changing climate. And so to facilitate this transition, within the SECRE, we have adopted what is called the 5P principle. So with this 5P principle, we have also integrated our 3 flagship programs. The first of these flagship programs is the Integrated Resource and Resilience Plan. And this is in response to the first P, which is plan. It is imperative that we have a plan for the sector, for each of the member states and for the region as a whole. And this will then feed into the second P, which is projects. As we have developed these plans, out of them, we will have several projects to be implemented so that we can facilitate this energy transition. So that brings us to the second of our flagship programs, the Project Preparation Facility. And this is to support our member states, both private and public sector, in participating in this energy transition. Now, as we implement these projects and as we collect data, we then will be able to inform the third P, which is policy. And we have the CARICOM Energy Knowledge Hub, or the CEKH, which is a repository of data and it has also a collection of best practices. And within the CEKH, we will facilitate a community of practice so that we can help to better inform policy. But we cannot do this alone. And so the fourth P is partnerships. And that has also been mentioned by previous colleagues. We must work together with our member states, with our other regional institutions, with international development partners such as USAID to pool our resources and our expertise together. And then we're doing all of this for the benefit of the fifth P, which is the people. The people of the region are at the center of everything that we're doing. They are the reason why we need to implement this energy transition in response to the climate challenge. And as we do this for the people, we get the people on board, we get their feedback into the loop, we get their take on the plans that we're making, and so the cycle starts again. We get their input, we can start planning again, going into our projects, our policies, partnering together for the people. And so that is what is going to frame the contributions that I'll make this afternoon, the 5 Ps. Thank you.
Thank you again, Sharianne. Sharianne, again, is from the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, otherwise known as SECRE. Next up, I'll invite Mr. Kistian Fleming from the Caribbean Agriculture Research and Development Institute to also make some opening remarks. Kistian, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon, participants. And it's a pleasure to represent the Caribbean Agricultural Research and Development Institute. I really just want to follow on the heels of the presenters that went before to agree that the impact from climate change, as well as other external variabilities, as well as internal, is felt by multiple sectors, as well as the agriculture sector. And the thing is that these sectors don't, it's not as though we operate in isolation. In one way or the other, we depend on each other. So there's also that element of cross-cutting, as well as reinforcing feedbacks that affect all sectors, as the energy sector and the water sector, and even fisheries went before. I couldn't help but think about the impact of their sectors on the agriculture sector and the other way around. I think we all would agree that with its sensitivity, as well as its exposure to the natural hazards, both from climate change and climate variability, the agriculture sector, we can imagine, is highly impacted. Especially over the last 5 years or so, I think we can agree that there have been a new wave, so to speak, of unprecedented events. When we look at some of the hurricanes that we've had in the last few years or so, we can just imagine the impact that it has had on individual member states as well as the region as a whole, and where in one day, or actually in just a couple hours, you have an entire farming community ravished from one hurricane event. This takes time to rebuild, it takes effort, it takes finances and resources, all of which isn't necessarily readily available. You have, at the other hand, you have droughts. In one hand, you have a lot of rain, a lot of wind, but on the other hand, you have droughts annually, in which, again, the sector is highly sensitive to. Plants need water, livestock need water, and even on the processing and value chain, at the end of things, we need water to ensure there is sustainable, economic, and productive commodities reaching our supermarkets as well as our plates. In light of all of this, we, as the speakers before mentioned, there's COVID, which adds another layer of complication to what we can do in the sector and what the sector faces. And these are just examples of what exacerbates pre-existing conditions. Even without climate change and without COVID, there are some conditions that have already presented some constraints to the agricultural sector. When we look at the region, we have a food import bill of close to $8 billion US, leaving the region annually. This is a cause for great concern, especially in a time where there's economic recession and economic downturn altogether. So, all of these speaks to the demand, the need, critical need for us to be more food secure, resilient in our development efforts, and us at CARDI, as well as with allied agencies, cross-sectoral institutions, have been working closely together to co-identify some of those solutions, whether it's through research and development or through just practice, to identify those key solutions that we must zero in on to enhance our resilience in the agriculture sector across the region. And some of those key areas include the need for water management, both its capture as well as its efficient use in the agriculture sector, the sustainable production practices to ensure that we are producing food in such a way that doesn't compromise the integrity of the environment and resources that we have, as well as the need for value-added processing, minimal processing, even simple solutions as the storage, freezing, drying, using the resources that we have available to us. I want to leave some of those for the discussion, but just to end by saying that I think one speaker went before said it involves people. Easy for us as technocrats to negate that. At the end of the day, our interventions involve working with people, working together, advising, and even learning from. And I think that's a key area in which we can use in our efforts going forward to ensure that we match our, the technical aspects with the social aspects to ensure that we have sustainable and comprehensive approaches going forward, as well as learning from them so that we don't repeat. Thank you again very much.
Thank you, Christian. Thanks for raising a number of really important issues, which I hope we'll get to explore in the next session and also with the audience. I take this opportunity to invite, last but certainly not least, our Janelle Tomlinson, who is a PhD candidate at the University of the West Indies and is a member of the Caribbean Youth Environment Network. She's based in Jamaica. Janelle, share with us your thoughts, please, on some of these issues that have been raised and also what you think perhaps might be some of the key perspectives as a young person yourself and also from the youth of the region. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Madam Moderator, for the introduction as well as to the panelists and their contributions as well. So as you rightly mentioned, I sort of wear two hats. So as a youth activist who is currently involved with the Caribbean Youth Environment Network, as well as a PhD candidate doing work on community-based adaptation to climate change. So this afternoon, however, I'd like to speak a little bit on both, but I start off with the youth perspective and how climate change has sought to, bring to the fore a lot of what the ongoing thoughts have been where vulnerable groups are concerned. So the youth are considered vulnerable as, a group that heavily depends on others to maintain them, heavily depends on others to ensure that they're able to survive. And, Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, has highlighted that COVID-19 has shown that it's a dress rehearsal for climate change. And it has shown, that a lot of the vulnerable groups who we talk about so often when we talk about climate change, whether it be the disabled, whether it be women in rural communities, whether it be the youth, COVID has significantly shown, how these persons could get left behind in the event of a crisis. And so from the youth perspective, I do recognize that, COVID has presented so many challenges for the young people. And again, it just shows us how climate change will similarly have an impact. We've seen how the crisis has presented a challenge for youth going to school. We've seen how in rural communities, their parents' income has been affected, which has significantly affected youth as well. We've seen where with the issues of drought, with the issues of hurricanes, with the issues of storms, where there are landslides, particularly again in rural communities, a lot of these young persons who, depend on these kind of livelihoods, where their parents rely heavily on these livelihoods, they are impacted, as a result of lowered income, as a result, Christian spoke about agriculture and how important it is. And with so many rural individuals in Jamaica relying on agriculture as their source of income, we can in fact see how young people are affected. Where school is concerned, again, where education is concerned, we've seen all these impacts on the youth. They are the ones, again, who, as we say, are the ones who are closest to the generation in the future, which means that we also have a role to play in what happens now, because we're going to be the decision makers of the future. And lots of persons often say, well, as youth, you have a role to play, and if not us, then who? We can't blame others when in the future we are able to say, if we had known, we should have done this, we could have done that, which is why as advocates, as activists, we try to create that space for inclusion, for having our voices heard. There's so many different sectors that have been spoken about. There's fisheries, there's agriculture, there's energy, there's wastewater. And again, I do think that it is important that while there are experts, in these particular fields, it's also important to include individuals on the ground who are being affected in the ongoing conversation. So the women, the youth, the disabled individuals, who will be affected by climate change, who you are making decisions for. Their experiences matter, their thoughts matter, their beliefs and opinions matter. So for us, it's very important that we foster inclusion into the ongoing conversations, provide the space for their voices to be heard and for their contributions. This idea of co-creation of knowledge and, dissemination of information that makes sense on the ground is something that we advocate for, through a lot of our efforts as well. And then on the flip side, I'll just touch quickly on some of the work that I've been doing in the field, particularly where community-based adaptation is concerned. And, a lot of these themes that are very pertinent when we talk about youth and the inclusion of youth are also important when we talk about community development and in particular bottom-up development. So when you go into these communities, you will hear that a developer came in and they wanted to implement a particular sort of infrastructure, whether it be a bridge or a road. But then if there's no consultation with the community, then you end up doing something and then there's some amount of challenges that you face later on because, you didn't know that this was a riverbed, or you didn't know that oftentimes, there are challenges with flooding when there is, excessive rain. So again, the idea of including the persons who are being affected, the persons who have, lived these realities and who are having these experiences are quite important. So for me, this afternoon just want to speak about the experiences that I've had, particularly in rural Jamaica, working with youth, working with vulnerable groups and communities, and just seeing possibly some of the areas where greater emphasis needs to be placed and other areas that need to be prioritized. And I will close with that. Thank you.
Now, well, I think that was a very welcome bit of a reality check in terms of, building on what was mentioned by other speakers and making sure that we are both people-centered, but also people-smart, and also just recognizing that in addition to the sectors, there are also communities which are dependent on these sectors or, shaped by these sectors and also intersect with these sectors. I think you've given us a lot of food for thought. And before I transition into thinking about some questions to pull out a little bit more of the specifics in terms of how we should think going forward, I'd like to just do a quick run through of the responses we got in the poll. And you would perhaps not be surprised to note that some of the speakers and the sectors we represent have counted highly on the poll. Also, some of the resources that we're reliant on, such as water and energy, were also selected. So I think the top one was agriculture at 29%, and then it was followed by water and tourism, both at 24%. And then we had, and I'm going to keep going down to see if I'm missing anything. And then we also have energy at 18% and fisheries at 6%. And our 17 respondents for forestry, construction, or other. But I do think this gives us some insight in terms of where we are in the region in terms of our understanding of these areas and issues, and also perhaps how they intersect. And I'm hoping that our discussion this afternoon will help to provide even more clarity about even, for example, the reliance of the agricultural sector on forestry and the reliance of a lot of us on forestry and the ecosystem services that forestry tends to generate that allows us to enjoy, clean air, clean water, etc. So without further ado, I'm going to start to pose a few questions to our panelists, and I look forward to engaging with them. Then we'll also invite later on to our audience to contribute some questions themselves, and I will also pose those to the panelists, and then we will end off with a quick round, and then we'll close the session. So in opening the batting, as it were, I'm going to go to my good friend Milton and ask him, if there is any evidence that sectoral interventions are reaching the most vulnerable groups and facilitating the building of resilience. I think that's a very good continuation from the very strong points that Janelle raised in her own comments at the end of the last session. So Milton, any evidence that what we're doing at a sectoral level is really reaching the most vulnerable groups and facilitating the building of resilience? Your thoughts, please.
Yes, I do think so, but at the same time, there's a lot more that needs to be done. In the fisheries sector, for example, we have some of the most vulnerable groups in our society. The sector is known as a social safety net. And so we have marginalized people, we have young people, people with limited skills and educational achievement, quite a few women, etc. And people who live in remote rural communities, in some cases quite isolated. So this is a sector where we have a significant proportion of vulnerable and marginalized groups. The interventions, I think, they are getting to them, but I'm so keenly aware that so much more needs to be done to build capacity, to empower, and to engage. And this is really a very, very important area, because, in my opinion, one of the fundamental pillars of moving forward and building resilience is to engage with the communities and to ensure that the vulnerable groups in particular are part of the process. And there is a lot more that's needed there. But I think we are making progress, and I think we need to continue to focus very clearly on the needs and the special needs of our vulnerable people or vulnerable communities. And I mentioned in my introduction that the fishing community itself tend to be among the most vulnerable wherever you are in the world. When you look at the impacts that have been suffered from tsunamis, etc., you'll quickly realize that the people living in the coast, and that's where the fishers are, that the impact of some of the severe systems, whether storms, hurricanes, or even tsunamis, that the impacts are disproportionate on fishing communities, because of their vulnerability. So we prioritize engagement with communities. We need to continue to do so, and to make sure that they are participants, key participants, not just spectators, but actual participants in the policy development and implementation, so that they can take ownership, and at the end they can have a capacity to be able to respond. And this is particularly important for isolated rural communities that can get cut off from the communication systems, from access by road, as has occurred in our region. In Dominica, for example, some of the fishing communities were cut off for weeks, and no support. They weren't able to get the relief support that others were able to get in a timely manner. And so we need to engage and make sure we put in place the type of arrangements that will ensure that they are more resilient, and they can take care of themselves and improve their situation. Thank you.
Lisa, you're muted.
Thank you very much, Milton. You've picked up, on some really important points in terms of making sure that we're fit for purpose and responding to the needs of the persons we're trying to reach, which Kirsten and Janelle mentioned. I wondered if anybody else wanted to jump in on this point before I go to the next point. And I'm keeping an eye also on the fact that we have some questions coming through from our audience. So did anybody want to make a comment on this question before I move on?
Yes, I wanted to.
Sure.
Because from an energy perspective, we don't have all the evidence about how the most vulnerable groups are being served, but we do know that there's a significant gap. So within the region, energy access is at about 90%. Well, those last few percentage points have been very challenging to achieve in terms of reaching those persons who are being underserved by energy. So one of the strategic priorities of this decree is to utilize sustainable energy as a means to advance the well-being of at-risk and vulnerable groups. So that is to embed and to transform. So to advance this, we've developed an energy access program. And again, we're working with our partners, with CARICOM Energy and with the Regional Universities Network, to implement these solutions. So we need to look at the studies so that we can be informed in when we're going into these communities. We don't want to just go into a community and turn the lights on. We want to be able to contribute to the economic growth of these communities. So whether it's a farming community or it's a fishing community that has been mentioned, we need to add value to that community. So we do need to have those consultations in terms of what are the needs of the community, how could we support and implement sustainable interventions in these communities. And one of the things that we are targeting with Energy Access is that we want to not just provide an energy solution, but also train people in the community. You know, it was mentioned about getting the buy-in of the communities and helping them to have ownership of whatever solutions are implemented. So, you know, we're looking at, you know, energy access needs to be tackled from a number of points. So in terms of allowing them to add value. So you talk about value added products coming out of agriculture, coming out of fishery. But also we just overall want to make sure that when we're engaging with our most vulnerable, we can improve their economic prospects, improve their social lives. So it needs to be a holistic approach. And I'll just end by saying to achieve this, it requires significant financing.
No, that's a very good point. Thank you very much, Sharianne. And this links in perhaps nicely to a point that was raised in the chat that I'll just make now, and you can continue to make your contributions about the role of the private sector and businesses in building resilience in communities. So maybe if others want to take up the question still, you can also bear that in mind in your responses, please. So I don't know if anyone else wanted to comment.
Well, yes, on that same question, with respect to water, we are, in our region, I think our utilities have done exceedingly well in terms of giving access to most of the people in our region. And I don't know our region is one where we have seen the transformation from people dying from these types of infectious waterborne diseases, where the big problems that we have today are with matters that are not related directly to water as far as health is concerned, but the chronic non-communicable diseases, which will take us to the food sector when we get to that. But as far as the water sector is concerned, I think, and governments have done a lot of work in, of course, it has affected and impacted our water utilities badly in terms of the ability to collect the sort of tariffs that will cover the cost of operations and to be able to keep those utilities running efficiently so that people can have affordable, water can be affordable, and most people, the majority of people in the society can afford water and have access to water. So I think in our region, I think most of the countries in our region would have attained that mark or the target of the SDG 6, that is water for all. I think where we may be falling short is as far as when it comes to our wastewater management, but and of course the reliability of the supply in the communities. But it is, I don't think we have any place in the Caribbean community where people are dying of thirst, as you may have in some other regions, because there is access to water. But there are challenges, as we say, with respect to the availability of water for treating and getting out to people.
Yes, I also want to comment on the point, because I think it's really, really important, as the commenters before presented. If we are honest with ourselves in some of these sectors, but I know I can speak for the agriculture sector, there is a big disconnect between the research that is produced and the science and what is actually practiced. And to answer the
Right.
first question as to the evidence, whether the interventions is actually reaching those who need it the most, the most vulnerable. I know there's examples, of testimonials, and you see, especially after a disaster, disaster relief. I think that's one key area that, with the systems that we have in place, we do a fair to fine job in terms of reaching those who need immediate relief, as well as, short-term, medium-term, and the long-term relief. But again, coming back to my point on the scientific side of things, research, the development side, I think Janelle mentioned it, that there's this disconnect between what we develop on the drawing board, as well as, behind our desktops, and what is actually needed in the community. And I'd venture to say that I think a big majority of our interventions really need to be centered around our systems and our approaches and our mechanisms in which we actually develop these ideas and innovations and for people. And that really needs to be centered around, around bringing people together who need to have a say, not simply as a participant, but also, on an equal level, so to speak, recognizing that everyone has their expertise current in its own domain, and bringing those together to develop common solutions that would really work for everyone, including the private sector. And I believe that they have a critical place in terms of driving innovation, driving development, given their goal towards, ensuring that these solutions are, at the end of the day, economic and profitable for everyone who is involved. And they tend to have a lens in which we can see through to make sure that these things at the end of the day is making sense for people's income, food, nutrition, security, and wider development goals, such as, reducing the food import bill, alleviating some of our poverty in places where there's chronic underlying poverty. It's, again, I'm probably going to sound like a broken record, but when I see the bulk of research that, has been done over the years, and then you face the farming community, face different forums like these, you hear that there's this missing link, there's this gap, there's this information that is on one side of things, and then a demand, so to speak, for said information, work that has already been done. And if we're not careful, we continue to redo the same things without, and I want to mention a keyword here, without learning. And I think it's something that I don't want to preempt one of your questions, but I think is one of the key innovations that we need across our region, the policy level, institutional, right down to the farm and household level, where we need to learn from what has gone before through reflection on the experience, and then making relevant changes to practice, to policy, because we don't want to be repeating the same things over and over, without doing something different.
Thank you, Christian. And you can anticipate my questions anytime. So that's a nice segue into the innovation discussion, but I also think you raised some important points about the question on research and practice. And so I'd like to merge those a little bit and ask all the panelists to give some thought to how do we tackle some of the issues you raised where, we do know there's an absence of data, but there is data that is there. We don't often see it or have access to it. We also know research is ongoing, but sometimes getting it in the form needed and getting it in time to actually respond to the issues on hand, kind of what Christian was talking about, isn't always as neatly packaged or as neatly done as we would like. How do you think we can really transform some of this into innovation that would really allow us to also transform the sectors and the ways in which they're interdependent with each other? Water, energy, agriculture, there's a food, energy, and water nexus that it's obvious in this region. There's, water, energy are also relevant to the fisheries sector, whether it's about the export, the packaging, the processing. And so what do you think are the leveraging points that are going to be important for innovation and would also allow us to really maximize available financial resources to move these innovations forward? And this is open to anyone, including you, Janelle.
All right, I'll start. So there are quite a few innovations that could transform the energy sector in the coming decade. So these will require some focused research to advance these innovations. And as you've mentioned, that link between energy, agriculture, and the ocean, that's an inextricable link. And one example I want to use in terms of leveraging our financial resources is as it relates to the blue economy. Now, the blue economy encompasses all of these three sectors: water, energy, agriculture. And there's actually a lot of work to be done in understanding this, because it's a resource that is sadly quite untapped across the region. Looking at what can we actually get from our oceans outside of just fisheries. So, but we have to do it sustainably. So funding is required for that research to look at the various ocean technologies as it relates to energy. There's ocean thermal energy. There is saltwater air conditioning, but also you're looking at getting water for drinking via desalination and exploring aquaculture. So there's quite a bit of research to be done there. Again, we are in that space working with our regional universities network, because as you mentioned, we have to do the research. We have to be informed by the science so that we can leverage those partnerships to make those informed decisions. So it's integral here, because here's the thing: we have to work together. No one country can actually undertake this work. It's expensive work. And so we have to really work together as a region to see how best we can explore this blue economy and find solutions that are contextually relevant for the region. Because we see it being employed in other areas, other sections of the world, but we have to make sure that whatever we do is contextually relevant for us. So that research needs to be done, but there's a lot to be explored in that blue economy space.
Great, thank you, Sherry-Ann. Does anybody else want to jump in? Janelle, we haven't heard from you in a little while, or Milton. Feel free.
Well, yeah, okay, I can just make a few remarks here. But before I do, if you will permit me, I just wanted to respond to the question in the chat about public private partnership in building resilience. I think this is a very important point. And so I just want to emphasize that, in my opinion, very strong public-private partnership will certainly help us to enhance resilience. In addition, when the private sector gets involved, it's an opportunity to create business opportunity and to build entrepreneurial skills. And I think these are all necessary. We do need innovative products, because this leads right into the innovation. We do need innovative products and services that will help us to lower cost and improve effectiveness in addressing many of the challenges we face at the community level. And the extent to which our private sector and their creative capacities can be mobilized and work alongside the public sector and international donors, etc. I think it's only going to be beneficial to us. So, very, very important point. Coming now to the issue of innovations, this certainly has to be a priority going forward, because whatever we do needs to be driven by science, hard evidence, and innovation. We're dealing with something that we have never had to deal with before. And so naturally, science and innovation are key issues that we have to address. But we have to think about innovation in a comprehensive manner, from the innovations at the community level, innovation in our social interactions, making sure that we build the adaptive capacity in the communities themselves to be able to think differently, to be able to mobilize and deal with the new issues and challenges that they're dealing with. In my opinion, information technology and communication technology are critical components that we can use in many ways, from providing early warning systems. And in fisheries, you may be, or some of you may be familiar with the fisheries early warning system solution application that was developed in collaboration with UE. And that's been rolled out in fishing communities where, it's an app that the fishers can take to sea based on a mobile phone, and they can get early warning about weather conditions, etc. Things like those, I think, will help a lot. Moving into e-commerce, this is fairly new to in the fisheries sector. There's a lot of opportunities there, but we need innovations to apply what is happening in the wider world. Bring that to bear on our vulnerable communities. And Janelle mentioned the issues and the opportunities available in the blue economy. I couldn't agree with her more. Very, very important. Going forward, that's a huge area that I think we have to pay attention to. But there, in addition to energy and so on, there are huge opportunities, and she mentioned aquaculture. Thanks very much. We have to begin to think differently about this space and think about even the need for modification and adaptation and development of suitable fishing vessel design, size, greater stability, given the more hostile environment, given the bad seas, rough waters that they have to contend with if they are to go beyond the coastal waters. So tremendous opportunities there, but also in aquaculture. Now there's a lot of attention being given to what is called multi-trophic aquaculture, which is very different from the approach that we have been using. But the basic point here is that, look, we need innovation in our fishing vessel design. We need innovation in the type of fishing gear we use so that they are more selective, that they are biodegradable. If they are lost at sea, they can disintegrate and not continue to fish. We need gear that are suitable for the type of challenges that we are facing now with climate change. Things that you can maybe stack and remove quickly from the water rather than leave them there. And so these are simple things. And recently we were involved in a project funded by the government of Japan called the Carifeco project. It was looking at promoting FAD fisheries, fish aggregating devices, where you set these moored FADs in the sea and they aggregate fish around them so fishers can easily go and capture them rather than having to spend a lot of time searching all over the place. And there was one design that was deployed all around Dominica. And after the passage of those two Category 5 hurricanes, they remained because they were submerged below the surface of the water. There are other FADs that were surface FADs, but most of those got lost. But the design that was below the water, many of those survived. So shortly after the passage of the hurricane, fishers were able to go and find those exactly where they were before, where they were set, and continue to fish while the others were gone. So, simple modification and innovation can yield big results. And these are things that I think we certainly have to pay attention to. So there have been a number of projects, and we don't have time to go through all of them now, but that have been looking at innovative approaches, adaptations that could be beneficial in the marine sector, and we're making good progress. And if I may even touch on the issue of renewables, the incorporation of more fuel efficient and renewable energy in our fishery sector, in the fishing engines and the technology we use to have it, and that's a very important area, a huge area for further innovation. In our building designs along the our fisheries infrastructure, fisheries and aquaculture infrastructure, huge opportunities there too, and people are looking at these things so that we can have more resilient buildings and safe arrangements, to protect the livelihood assets of those who are engaged. So those are just a few, but I think I must allow other people to speak on these things too. So thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Milton, and thanks for making that nice segue from some of the points that were raised by Sherry Ann on renewable energy. You got me thinking immediately about, when are we going to see boats with some, suitably sized, solar panels. They're out in the water all day. They've got plenty of opportunity to absorb some sun and generate some energy. So I'm hoping that somebody's hearing you and we can come up with some, some options. We've got the University of the West Indies. So I'm hoping that, again, some young person, maybe this is going to be a brainwave and somebody can come up with a nice battery pack or something that can certainly help, because I certainly have been involved in a few conversations with fisher folk talking about the need, that they're open, but, the whole battery, the energy cost, the bill in terms of the overall package of the cost of fishing is not a small one. So I definitely think there's also some openness there as well. Anyone else want to talk on this point? There's an interesting one in the chat that I also want to bring into you about, the things you've raised. It seems to me that even when we talk about bringing in the private sector, public-private sector partnership, the enabling environment, the regulatory framework is going to be important. And so I wonder how we need to think about that as well in terms of being able to enable some of this, to be able to open up those opportunities for individuals as well as the private sector, for the fisherman himself who has an idea to find a way to be the innovator. I'm not really sure we've done enough in the region to make those kind of opportunities possible. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. And I'm just using fisheries as an example. But I think if you think about water and farmers, if you think about, other areas, I think we have the same challenge where we haven't necessarily always put in place, the opportunity for the average Joe, who I'm sure has plenty of ideas, to actually say, okay, maybe I've got an idea. What can I do next? How do I build it? How do I come up with a model? How may I be the innovator, for the sector? So I'd love to open up the floor to all of you if you have any ideas on that and the role of the enabling environment and opening up the door for innovation, not just in our projects, but for people who are actually in the sector, who probably know the ups and downs of the sector better than anybody, to really be also part of that innovation challenge.
All right, take the first stab at it.
Okay.
So just following up on the conversation that we started in terms of innovation, really where things are headed and what we have seen based on the different shocks that we've had to our economies is that we really have to look at our business models differently. And I think that's where a lot of the innovation is going to come in. So we've seen with the pandemic, and I'll go back to the energy example, where we had significant changes in where the energy demand was, because you had more persons working from home. And so now businesses and utilities and everybody had to change how it is that they provided energy. But we really need to look at the whole system differently. So for instance, we speak about electric vehicles and wanting to have more electric vehicles. And utilities may look at it as there's going to be an increase in demand because people are going to be switching from buying gasoline or diesel to using electricity. But then you could look at the electric vehicle as a part of your supply system, and because they have large batteries in them. And so they could help to maintain stability of the grid network. You mentioned the boats having solar modules on them. That is definitely an opportunity for innovation. And so there are very many different ways that, innovation can come in to respond to the different challenges that we're facing. And I think what's required from the private sector, from the man on the street, is use their experiences and be agile in responding to the different changes that are happening. And as it relates to the policy framework, we can't emphasize enough that needs to be in place to encourage the innovation, because you don't want to spend your time doing the research, testing a product or a solution, and then there are barriers to you implementing it, because you're not doing all of this. Yes, you could be doing it for the good, but very often you're doing it for providing for yourself and your family. And so the policy framework is very important, but also having that representation, speaking up, being a part of the conversations when you have the opportunity to, and stepping up, even if you don't think everything is there. I'm going to use an example. Janelle isn't here, but from a young person, when COVID hit last year in Jamaica, there were a group of young engineers from the University of the West Indies, Mona campus. The company they have is called Pre-Labs, and they stepped up to start designing face shields. They started, implementing a number of solutions, working with the Mona Tech engineering services at the Mona campus to start solving some of the problems that they were seeing on the ground. And because of that, they started to get recognition. So I said, just observing in your own space, what are you seeing? What are the challenges that you're having? How can you fix it? And then speaking up so that you can get that policy framework in place to support the ongoing sustainability of whatever solution you're implementing.
Great, thanks, Sharianna. And you've also answered another question about how COVID has impacted on, with climate and impacted some of the sectors that you're working in and some of the ways in which people have even been responding to the challenges, but also the opportunities presented by COVID. Still want to pose the question to other members of the panel in terms of that question about the regulatory environment, but also a point that's been made by the audience in terms of how do we make sure that also things like environmental assessments that are in the regulatory framework are actually implemented, this kind of stuff, including how they need to make mandatory the whole issue of consultation with the community and present, an involvement because I think it's even beyond consultation. It should also be involvement. It goes back to that point that Sharianna made about co-creation. So how do we make sure that these things that are on the books are actually happening, to respond to these challenges and opportunities? Ignatius, is that you ready to make an input? Please go ahead.
Well, okay. The regulatory environment, we have as many laws that are written, but the challenge we often find is about the enforcement of those laws by the various authorities. And sometimes the undue influence of the political directorate on some of these quasi-state institutions that have been established to regulate much of what we speak about. So it gets down to a governance issue where we ought to allow these institutions to follow the law, as it were. And that is critical as far as it is with all the sectors that we speak about. If we are going to create conducive environment for both the public sector and the private sector to thrive, and for the public to enjoy the benefits of these activities. For example, in the water sector, and we in the start of this discussion, we spoke about the impacts on forest and the whole integrated water resource management issues. We have seen in our dependency on now moving away. At one time it was agriculture predominantly in the region, which impacted a lot of our water supply. And now that we are being impacted by climate change, this has been exacerbated. We now have another situation where with tourism, and when we get most of our tourists within the region, it is during what is called the dry season in the region. So it is a double demand or even triple the consumption. I think one study showed that the tourism, one tourist or tourism plant might consume 10 times what a domestic household would consume. So you understand the pressure on a water utility to deliver on that type of expansion. And we continue to build more of these hotel plants and other hospitality plants to take care of the tourism that we depend on. Then we denude a lot and put a lot of our environment at risk. Our coastal zone areas, which is where our fisheries would be doing their breeding and so on. And all the mangroves are removed to put in marinas and to put in the other infrastructure required for those tourism plans. So we need to have the planning authorities to be able to do their work freely and to use the science in making decisions, and all should be able to follow that. So I think there's as much regulation to do that. We also, as going back to the innovative parts, and it's not so much innovation in terms of water conservation, and some of the soft technologies that we use in the, as we say, in the ridge to reef, which can protect our coastlines. It ought not to be all concrete and steel. There are soft measures that we can use, and my good friend from Cardi knows a lot of that kind of technology in basic soil and water conservation practices that can protect not only the water resource, but also the marine resource. Because whatever happens on the shore is going to impact the coastal environment. So it requires a lot of that to allow the autonomy of those institutions for proper decision making. And it requires as well for us to be able to plan better in terms of the use of space, the whole spatial environment, the land use policies. Many of the countries would have proper land use policies. But as to whether we would follow the guidelines for the use of certain spaces is another question, and which jeopardizes and compounds the problem that we face with climate change.
Thank you, Ignatius.
Yeah, if I may?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. Just a few words on the regulatory systems. This is another fundamental pillar, in my opinion. It's difficult to move forward unless you have proper framework that promotes, facilitates, and provides the necessary incentive to move forward. And this is where the regulatory framework is required. So at the Caribbean level, at CARICOM level, we're working together. At the regional level, we need to have very good and clear and comprehensive regional frameworks. We need to have similar frameworks at the national level. The truth is, in my opinion, the type of integrated legal and regulatory framework that we need is not yet in place. It's been put in place at the regional and national level, but we still have a long way to go. Frameworks that really draw on the realities and the science and information, current up-to-date information that we have regarding climate change and the issues and challenges related to it, and the type of standards and the procedures that we need to properly plan, to monitor, to implement, adopt, etc., and to make sure we have processes such as processes that really embrace and include stakeholders, people at the community level, vulnerable groups, and so on. These are areas, in my opinion, that we still need to improve on. And so this is actually basic. So because we're not gonna achieve what we want with the existing way we plan and do business. So I do hope that we will continue to pay attention to this and put in place robust systems and processes and clear standards so that we can all move forward in a coordinated manner. I just wanted to mention one more thing about innovation. A few years ago, I had the opportunity of visiting Iceland, and I went to a center that they established called the Innovation Center. Really, really impressive. It is like a mall, literally like a mall, but it's called the Innovation Center, and it houses people from different sectors, and also academia, banks, fishing enterprises, all different sectors. And the idea was to put all these people together and force them to interact with each other, to sit around the table lunchtime and during coffee breaks and talk and exchange ideas. And all of this was directed and structured as a mechanism to promote intersectoral and interdisciplinary exchange to promote innovation. And it's amazing. It's amazing what Iceland has done in terms of innovation in the science and innovation in the marine environment and marine resources, and the enormous economic benefits they have reaped as a result of that. In a few years, they have transformed their fisheries and add such tremendous value, so that it moved from being I think a $1 billion industry to like a $5 billion industry, something like that, largely on the basis of applying science, technology, and innovation. Just unbelievable. And the thing about it is that Iceland is a country with only 350,000 people. And that was one thing that I found really impressive. And they have very limited resources. The marine resources is basically all they have. Now they have tourism growing, but the backbone of their economy is the marine resources. They have very little else. Of course, they have cheap energy, geothermal energy. But the point is, they are similar to us in many ways in terms of their resource endowment, or we, in many cases, have more natural resources than they have. But because of the way they have applied science and technology, and now they are forced into using this very simple mechanism, the benefits, have been just enormous. So thank you very much.
Chair, if I may, I want to follow a similar order, starting with your regulatory framework. I think Milton put it really well, and from an agriculture perspective, it's important because when you look at some of the challenges or the barriers, so to speak, to food security, agriculture development, they are not one thing. They are multiple things that reinforce each other, negative feedbacks, so to speak. And an example of those of that is you have an environment in which our producers, agriculture producers, is competing in a losing battle in many cases with foreign imports. So that if our interventions at the farm level, at the grassroots level, isn't being reinforced by policies with regards to imports, with regards to the access that our primary producers and processors have to put them on a not even an equal playing field, so to speak, but a competitive playing field, because you want some competition to ensure that there's innovation, that we continue to have a sector that is striving to innovate, to think about how they produce and those things. But at the end of the day, you need to bring all those challenges together and under a framework that address most of them in a way that, as he put it, would ensure that we are moving in a direction that isn't taking 2 steps forward, then 5 steps backward. And on the innovation front, I think another model or another key area, to foster fruitful innovation is, creating a safe space. And I think Janelle mentioned it at the beginning. Safe space in which there are different parties and different players who could, under a common challenge, common solution, all with the objective of identifying a solution that works for everyone or for most persons. But that space being a model or intervention or area in which we can have the different players coming together, bringing their viewpoints and trying to marry those together in a way that would bear fruit both economically, socially, and even environmentally. And I think there is a great need for us to at all levels to learn of cases in which to document and to learn of cases in which that has been done. And Milton just gave an example of Iceland to support his point. But I believe that we have examples in the region, parts of the world and the developing world in which we need to document and to appreciate why things were successful or weren't, and then learn from those by putting again measures into place, whether it's regulatory, institutional, and at any lower level, so to speak. So those are some of my points.
Thanks, Christian. I mean, I think in some ways you've also answered some questions we have in the chat in terms of sectors that that you're currently not working with, but you think might be important. I think you've all hinted at the need for just a broad-based, kind of whole of society, and certainly a more integrated approach, even amongst water, agriculture, energy, etc. I think somebody mentioned the banking sector, for example. Milton mentioned that in his example, but also it seems that one of the things you've raised is also just a whole idea that when we talk innovation and we even talk about technology, there's a social aspect to this. It's not just about hardwiring, and hard pieces. The people part and the creation of the collaborative forums, which is another point that one of our audience raised in their question, that there's definitely need for that. And so as we seek to conclude the session, I'd like to kind of wrap up a couple of questions from the audience in terms of if you can talk about what do you think are going to be some of the key elements for collaboration and communication that will help to move some of what you've put on the table forward. And then if you can also think of an unusual suspect, perhaps, that you can work with to kind of move forward some of these ideas that you've put on the table as well. And that way I would have, made sure that the questions from the audience have not been, ignored completely and are responded to. The last part of that, and you've only got a minute, is there anything that we can pick up from COVID that the agenda that maybe we hadn't thought about before? So who wants to go first?
All right.
I could.
See, I've been going first.
I'm glad to see that. To answer. Yes.
Okay. So as it relates to collaborating and working together, definitely not just when we meet in webinars, but having working meetings, where we are actually sitting down with the persons from the different sectors, and we're putting our plans together. And sitting in a meeting recently with a number of energy personnel, there were persons from meteorology and hydrology, climate scientists, and the CDB was there. And just the ideas that we were able to come up with and not just ideas, but moving them into plans, because we had different partners, different perspectives coming together, working together to find those solutions. And I think that is really where we're going to be able to respond going forward. COVID-19 has definitely taught us that we must be agile. We definitely don't know when, the threats are going to come. It could be a hurricane that is simple, maybe it's a tropical storm, and we've seen where it becomes a Category 5 overnight and then sustains Category 5 winds. And so we have to be agile. That's definitely how what we're going to have to do going forward. Work together and be prepared to respond and pivot quickly.
Great. Thank you, Sherry-Ann. Ignatius, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm sure. I would say that what we would need to do on the lessons from COVID-19 is similar to what has been said, that there's need for agility, but at least we have to strengthen our disaster risk response planning, and also to have in place the standard operating procedures for operating under such conditions. And I think we have to also take on the various health and pandemic risks into those plans, which I think they were there, but perhaps subdued. And how do we manage the lessons learned from the COVID-19 in terms of how we responded in supplying water and all the other things that we needed to have in place. And particularly for the storage of water, which will continue to be an issue in our region, where we are said to be, we supposed to have about 7 of the most water-stressed countries in the world. And so the need for stepping up or improving our storage capacities to mitigate those issues is critical. And of course, the financing and involving our young people. And I'm pleased today that I've seen quite well, half of our team there are youth, and it says that the future looks good because we have youth involved, and we can involve them in perhaps through the universities in incorporating in everything that we do. Some part of whatever project is taking place, to be able to use young people from the universities to capture a lot of that data that is badly needed for decision making.
Great, thank you, Ignatius. Milton, I'll ask you to jump in and just give your perspective from the fisheries.
Right. I know we are limited with our time, but COVID has been a wake-up call for us, and I think it's a great opportunity. It shows us some of our weaknesses and our vulnerabilities and areas that we need to focus on going forward. Very basic stuff. But we absolutely need to get our act together to be more self-reliant, to build resilience in our systems, addressing our social, economic, environmental situation, and to be able to chart a path forward for our people. It points us in the direction that we have to go. And very simply, there is no alternative to us working together, to adopting an integrated, multidisciplinary approach to dealing with these challenges. We need the engineers, we need the technologists, we need the scientists, we need the communities and the private sector people all working together along with the government officials towards a single purpose of ensuring our long-term future. We realize we have to depend upon ourselves. We have to depend upon the resources that we have available to us for sustaining ourselves and for taking care of our people. So I do hope we take advantage of this opportunity and we put in place the goals and the objectives that we can work together to achieve, and we mobilize the financial resources and work together with our international development partners and donors, to get the resources to address the priorities that we define for ourselves to achieve our developmental objective. So, I think the future is exciting, but we really need to strengthen our collaboration and cross-sectorial cooperation to be able to achieve these things that we have mentioned as issues, challenges, and a path that we should be going down in order to achieve the quality of life and standard of living that we desire for our people. Thank you.
Thanks, Milton. Kirsten, last word for you, and then I'll make a 30-second closing. But wish you to hopefully you can tell us about that unusual suspect, that new person, that new entrant that you think you may be able to work with to transform how we do agriculture.
Well, I don't know if there's a new suspect, so to speak, but I think just on the heels of what Milton said, I think a key suspect is integration, multiple levels. Mm-hmm. I think that's really a key point that across our sectors, across our member states, we don't all have everything. And so even the notion of food security as opposed to food sovereignty, I prefer in which we capitalize on each other's strengths and to wherever we are weak, because you do have some member states that are closer, that they are doing well in terms of food security. I think some of the others could, be supported by that. But just that integration, the free flow of goods and services and people, I think is really key to our plight and to development efforts. And therefore, I see a continuing key role for the CARICOM Secretariat as they bring together the regional institutions as well as the member states, all beating the same drum, singing the same tune. So I think that's going to be one of our key strategies going forward, and I do endorse it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christian, and it is my pleasure to thank everyone, thank our esteemed panelists, but thank our audience and thank everyone who made this possible, USAID, environmental incentives, all of you for your participation and for a wonderful panel, wonderful discussions, really useful, intense, and new ideas. And I'm hoping that we're able to take this forward and transform how we work in these sectors. And we're going to be able to implement some of what was raised today. Thank you very much, and signing off.